The first time Rebecca Lawson asked him the question, the entire office seemed to fall silent. He was standing by the conference table, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed on the floor, as if it held the answers to everything he had ever lost. The afternoon sun poured through the glass windows of the downtown Chicago high-rise, catching the silver in his dark hair. Rebecca's voice was calm, but it carried something deeper than authority. "Why won't you look at me?" In that single moment, years of buried pain rose in Jonathan Hayes' chest like a storm threatening to break. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of single parents, take a second to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that compassion can change everything. Jonathan had mastered the art of invisibility. At 34, he moved through the halls of Lawson and Rowe Financial like a shadow. He arrived before everyone else and left long after the lights dimmed across the city skyline. He was the senior data analyst everyone relied on but rarely noticed. He spoke softly, avoided eye contact, and never lingered in casual conversations by the coffee machine. But his silence wasn't arrogance. It was survival. Every morning before sunrise, Jonathan woke in his small two-bedroom apartment on the north side of Chicago. He prepared oatmeal with blueberries, packed a Spider-Man lunchbox, and gently woke his 6-year-old son, Caleb. The boy's curls bounced as he sleepily wrapped his arms around his father's neck. Those few seconds of warmth were the anchor that held Jonathan steady. 2 years earlier, Jonathan's wife, Meredith, had died in a car accident during a snowstorm outside Milwaukee. One phone call had split his world in half. In the months that followed, grief hollowed him out. But Caleb still needed breakfast. He still needed bedtime stories. He still needed someone to check for monsters under the bed. So Jonathan learned to carry his sorrow quietly. Rebecca Lawson, the firm's managing director, had noticed him long before that afternoon confrontation. At 40, she was sharp, respected, and known for reading people as easily as balance sheets. She had built the company from a struggling startup into one of Chicago's most trusted financial advisory firms. Employees admired her discipline, but they rarely saw her softer side. She noticed how Jonathan never joined team lunches. She noticed how he declined promotions that required more visibility. She noticed how he flinched whenever praise was directed at him. And she noticed he never looked directly at her. It wasn't defiance. It was fear. The confrontation had not been planned. It erupted after a high-stakes presentation to potential investors from New York. Jonathan's projections had saved the deal. Without his data adjustments, the firm would have lost millions. Yet when Rebecca publicly thanked him in the boardroom, he kept his eyes glued to the carpet. Later, she asked him to stay behind. The city buzzed 30 floors below as Rebecca stepped closer, confusion flickering behind her composed expression. She asked him why he wouldn't look at her, and Jonathan felt the fragile wall he'd built around his heart begin to crack. He tried to deflect. He muttered something about focusing on work, but Rebecca wasn't convinced. There was something wounded in his posture. Something almost apologetic in the way he held himself, as if he believed he took up too much space in the room. The truth was far more complicated than office politics. Jonathan avoided eye contact with powerful women because it reminded him of the last argument he'd had with Meredith. On the night she died, they had fought about something trivial: missed groceries, unpaid bills, exhaustion. He had been distracted, staring at his phone while she stood in front of him asking him to listen. She had asked him to look at her when she was talking. He hadn't. It was the last thing she ever asked of him. The guilt had become a permanent scar. Looking into the eyes of a woman in authority stirred that memory, and his chest tightened as if he were reliving that final evening. Rebecca waited patiently, her expression softening when she saw his hands tremble. For the first time since Meredith's funeral, Jonathan told someone the truth. He spoke quietly, haltingly, explaining how he'd lost his wife, how he blamed himself, how he felt unworthy of leadership or recognition. He admitted that he kept his head down because it felt safer than risking connection. Rebecca listened without interrupting. The bustling office outside the glass walls faded into irrelevance. When he finally finished, his voice barely above a whisper, he forced himself to lift his gaze. His eyes were red, vulnerable, and unguarded. Rebecca did not see weakness. She saw a father fighting every day to stay afloat. The change did not happen overnight. But something shifted between them that afternoon. Rebecca began assigning Jonathan projects that required collaboration, not isolation. She paired him with supportive team members and encouraged flexible hours when Caleb had school events. She created a family-friendly policy that allowed parents to work remotely 2 days a week. The firm had never formally addressed work-life balance before. Some employees grumbled, others thrived. Jonathan, for the first time in years, felt seen rather than scrutinized. He started attending occasional team lunches. He even shared a photo of Caleb during a holiday potluck. His colleagues were surprised to discover the quiet analyst had a dry sense of humor and an uncanny ability to explain complex data in simple terms. At home, Caleb noticed the difference too. His father laughed more. He seemed lighter, less burdened by invisible weight. Then came the setback. One rainy Thursday, Caleb developed a high fever while Jonathan was finalizing another crucial investor report. The babysitter called in panic. Torn between career and fatherhood, Jonathan's old fear resurfaced. He imagined disappointing Rebecca, losing the stability he'd fought to rebuild. But this time, he chose differently. He walked straight into Rebecca's office, met her eyes and told her he needed to leave. She didn't hesitate. "Family comes first," she said gently, telling him to take care of his son. That small moment healed something deeper than professional anxiety. It showed Jonathan that leadership could coexist with compassion. Over the next year, Jonathan accepted a promotion to Director of Analytics. He trained junior analysts, mentoring them not just in spreadsheets but in resilience. He spoke openly about balancing grief and responsibility. He even began attending a support group for widowed parents in Chicago, slowly allowing himself to imagine a future that included happiness again. Rebecca, too, transformed. Watching Jonathan confront his pain reminded her that authority didn't require emotional distance. The firm's culture shifted toward empathy, retention improved, and productivity soared. Investors noticed the stability that came from loyal, valued employees. The day Jonathan finally stood at the annual company conference to present the firm's 5-year growth strategy, the auditorium lights were blinding. Hundreds of employees filled the hall. Caleb sat in the front row beside Rebecca, swinging his legs proudly. Jonathan adjusted the microphone. His heart pounded. For a split second, he felt that old instinct to look down. Instead, he lifted his head. He scanned the room confidently, then allowed his eyes to rest on Rebecca. There was no guilt now, no shame, just gratitude. He spoke clearly about growth, teamwork, and the courage it takes to ask for help. He didn't mention Meredith by name, but he carried her memory with strength rather than regret. When the applause thundered through the hall, Caleb jumped to his feet, clapping the loudest. Jonathan realized that looking up had never been about authority, it had been about forgiveness. Before we reach the end, if this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video with someone who might need a reminder that healing is possible. Your engagement helps stories like this reach more people who are silently struggling. And right now, I have a special request for you. Comment the word hope if you believe that second chances can rebuild broken hearts. That evening, as Chicago's skyline shimmered against the darkening sky, Jonathan walked out of the building with Caleb's small hand in his. Rebecca watched from her office window, a quiet smile on her face. 2 years earlier, Jonathan had believed his life ended in a snowstorm on a Wisconsin highway. But healing had arrived in an unexpected question inside a glass-walled office. Why won't you look at me? Because sometimes, the hardest person to face is not your boss. It's yourself. And when you finally do, everything changes.